Can you hear me okay? Okay, I'll just very briefly put down a couple of quick lines here to explain to see how the book actually came to be. So thank you, David, to start with. Your Grace, Vicar General, special invited guests, brothers, ladies and gentlemen. I have the pleasure of introducing Brother Paul Hawkes, the author of our Centenary book, titled A Bold Story Well Proven. Now that's been said many times and I'm sure you all know it. Very briefly, a Centenary committee was formed about 5 years ago under Brothers Don Campbell's leadership with Brian Cooper as Supreme Knight and Ian Fleetwood, who was the state chairman at the time, and also Brother Boyle. So those people were the original History Committee members. I came onto the scene in 2017 and got involved in the process that had already been started. This is essentially to look at all the State Council minutes of meetings from 1922, which were fortunately kept in our archive cupboards. At this point I'd like to mention Brother Tony Shah and his wife Ida, who over many years spent a lot of time sorting out all the archival materials, all the minutes, books, documents, stuff like that. Then they sorted and organised it in chronological order. So apart from just sorting it, they actually put it into a chronological order, so it was really useful. Then members took the minute books and read through them, making notes of key events. The original minute books up to about 1940, I read quite a few books, were handwritten. Some of the writing was absolutely beautiful. All those ex-teachers, you would have no doubt enjoyed reading the old script writing. And then they got a typewriter somewhere around 1940s and started typing, which made life easier. In 2018, Brother Don became state chairman, and I took over the role as chair of the History Committee and continued with the process. The next stage was an action plan for the history book development to be drawn up, and Dr. Vint Thomas became heavily involved at this stage and through the following years with our monthly meetings. The notes that people were doing on the minutes were mostly in Word format, and these were used as a list of possible headings and chapter topics. And I recall John once came up with a list of about 50 chapters. Paul, I don't know if you ever saw that list, but 50 chapters. Anyway, in 2019 we started looking at organising an author to write our book. We advertised in the Southern Cross and in a number of places. We narrowed it down to Brother Paul Hawkes, a local branch secretary who had gained a Bachelor of Theology honours and developed an interest in ecclesiastical history. He had recently written a book, Prophetic Pastoral Leadership, 2018, to do with church history in SA during the leadership of Archbishop Leonard Fortin. So perhaps some of you may have read it. Brother Brian and I had the pleasure of interviewing Paul at the Walker's Arms, and I think we had a couple of years on that one, as I recall, and subsequently reported to State Council our recommendations. Don and I then organised a contract drawn up by Finlayson lawyers that was used to engage Paul Hawkes. So that gives you an idea of what was involved before Paul actually got around to doing the work, and then the fantastic work is actually done is what you're going to see. Brother Paul then took on the task and researched our archives, and they were the church archives. The History Committee met monthly with Paul as he was doing all the primary research work, which he will elicit shortly, and went through all the notes, resources, photos that the committee had, including interviews with a dozen or so older members who shared many thoughts and experiences. Brother Paul has done a fantastic job putting it all together, which is much appreciated by all, and I'm sure you will when you buy a book. The title of the book is A Bold Story Well Proven. I'm sure you'll get much enjoyment out of reading past history. I give you Brother Fr Hawks.
Thanks for the introduction, Andy. Good evening. It is my pleasure to launch this history of the Knights of the Southern Cross in South Australia, and I hope that each of you will obtain a copy. So that you are not buying a pig in a poke, I would like to give a sense of the writing and construction of this history. The writing of the centenary history of the South Australian Knights would not have been possible without the work of the History Subcommittee, chaired by Brother Andy Tomasi, which Andy has just described. I entered the fray in late 2019 with a commission to write the history. There were various guesstimates as to the scope of the book. Initial suggestions were 200 pages, 60,000 words, and some photos. Ultimately, the book ended up at 300 pages, 116,000 words, 161 photographs, 48 of which are in colour. I was given a little over 3 years to complete the book, which initially seemed plenty of time and a nice relaxed task. But then I looked at the resources I had to draw on. 100 years of minute books from State Council, along with many other minute books from defunct branches, Supreme Council, advanced members, and other sundry documents. It was a huge amount of material, carefully organised, but a little overwhelming. Clearly, this was not going to be relaxed. My first problem was just trying to read the minute books, which for the most part had been handwritten with varying degrees of legibility. The second problem was trying to generate some life and interest from these quite oblique and dry accounts. For example, the first minutes consisted mainly of a list of names of founding members and a note that a letter had been sent to Archbishop Spence and that a reply had been duly received. There were no surviving copies of any correspondence, in or out. Through the generosity of Father Philip Marshall, I was able to access the Archdiocesan archives, which proved to be very fruitful. Here I found copies of the correspondence referred to in our minutes, and so I was able to see that in February 1922, KSC Secretary Bert Savage had indeed written, "May it please your Grace, I have instructed to officially notify your Grace that on last Sunday, February the 5th, a branch of the Knights of the Southern Cross was duly established in Adelaide. 2 representatives attended from Sydney and met a representative gathering of practical Catholics numbering 30. The election of officers took place and resulted as follows: Grand Knight J.S. Malone, Senior Deputy Grand Knight Mr. A.J. Cork, and so on. Archbishop Spence then replied, "I am delighted to know that a branch of the Knights of the Southern Cross has been established in Adelaide. The names of the officers mentioned are all of the right type, and I sincerely hope that every precaution will be taken in the future to admit no one as a member unless he is not only a good practical Catholic, but also discreet and prudent." And Archbishop O'Regan, you might be pleased to know that we remain discreet and prudent to this day, more or less. I spent quite some time during November and December 2019 mining the Archdiocesan archives, which enabled me to add this colour and context to the KSC minutes. The archive then closed for that year's Christmas New Year break, and I was intending to go back in February 2020, but then COVID-19 arrived, which closed everything for much of that year. Probably against best practice, I took the minute books home with me and spent those lockdown months going through them and accessing a variety of online resources. This included the Southern Cross, where I found no mention of the KSC, between 1922 and 1970, because in those years the order was operating in, if not exactly secret, then in an extremely discreet manner. However, I soon realised that many initiatives carried out by the order were in fact being fully reported, but attributed to individuals or proxies rather than the Knights. It was a question of reading between the lines. I could see the work being mentioned in the minutes and then reported on in the Southern Cross. One good example of this was the Catholic subscription ball, which ran for 48 consecutive years from 1922 until 1969, and was long regarded as one of the Archdiocese's most important social events. This event was initiated and conducted by the Knights and publicly reported on each year without mention of the order, who were hiding in plain sight. This was highlighted in an article on the Mainly for Women page of the Southern Cross newspaper in 1964, which headlined with a revelation: for 44 years, the annual Catholic subscription ball has been organised by a committee of men! Exclamation mark. G.R. Hancock, the then Knights General Secretary, was for the purposes of this article described as the honorary secretary of that subscription ball committee. It was during the time of COVID lockdown that I was able to take advantage of the work previously done by the History Committee in recording and transcribing interviews with various Knights. Indeed, the enforced time at home, with no meetings and few outings, certainly accelerated the writing of the book and enabled it to be finished well ahead of schedule. Another factor in the speed of the work was the monthly Zoom and other meetings with the History Subcommittee, which critiqued the developing writing and content of the book. Finally, an editing team of Dr. Vin Thomas and Brothers Andy Tomasi and Don Campbell worked closely with me to shape and verify the prose. I'm also indebted to Brother Rod Hearn, who was of great assistance in identifying the colour photographs used in the book. By late 2021, the book had taken its final shape and had a title: A Bold Story, Well Proven, which I took from a line in the 14th century poem, Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. I have divided this account of the founding and prospering of the South Australian Knights into three parts: one historical prologue, two chronology, and three the branches. Part one, the historical prologue, briefly examines the background to the social and political climate of South Australia, which eventually led to the formation of the order here. I have highlighted the sectarianism which was rife in those early years. And this precise issue is fundamental to the founding of the Knights, and ironically, it is the diminution of sectarianism against Catholics in the modern age that has triggered an ongoing need for us to reassess our fundamental purpose. Such reassessment has resulted in many worthwhile ventures, with the foundation of the Southern Cross homes being the most enduring and noteworthy. Part two, the chronology, traces the history of the South Australian Knights in a chronological fashion, but since many of the endeavours and issues which are described span many decades, this chronology is not strictly linear. As with modern Catholic Knights elsewhere, the Knights of the Southern Cross have always proclaimed a particular fealty to the bishop and were and are variously styled the Pope's men or the Bishop's men. It is for this reason that I have given a chronology of the 100 years framed by the papal reigns of the bishops of Rome. It is these papacies which in a real sense have defined how the Catholic Church evolves and sees itself in the world. The Knights, like the rest of Catholic society, are church, and these changes and responses have been shared by us all. Part three of the book, The Branches, traces the founding and evolution of the branches in South Australia. This account is a very general overview, giving a potted history of each branch, group, section, division, and club which have existed over the last 100 years. Finally, there are three appendices which cover the foundation, members, governance and honour rolls. In 1972, at the time of our 50th anniversary of founding, the then state chairman, Jack Cashin, was concerned about the declining momentum of the order, and on the front page of Nightlife exhorted, "Fellow members, do not let the past be ashamed of the present." I trust that this history abundantly honours the past and also reminds us how, as in the past, we have adapted to changing times and must continue to do so. Jack Cashin's call to not let the past be ashamed of the present should continue to remind us of the need to keep this bold story alive and relevant. Thank you.
David Lloyd.
Friends, as you've heard, Paul has spent an enormous amount of time in preparing this booklet. Indeed, if you purchase one this evening when you leave, you're guaranteed to have a free copy of the next one in 21-22. So take it up and take one as you go. I wasn't aware until I spoke to Paul earlier this evening that he's also done some writing for the Earl of Leicester, the Duke of Edinburgh, and the Prince of Wales, and quite a few other hotels in Adelaide. We're privileged indeed to have Paul on State Council, and he's done truly a great. Please buy a book when you leave, because we need to sell 300. So, and we're going to run out. So again, thank you, Paul, and please join me in applauding Paul. Thank you.